I thought they were proud of me. I thought this win, this one thing I fought for, trained for, cried over, finally meant I mattered. But when the trophy arrived in the mail, they placed it in my brother's room. Not because he earned it, but because they said he needed it more. This story isn't about jealousy. It's about the way families reward struggle over success. It's about what happens when being strong means getting nothing in return. In this video you'll hear the full story, what I did to earn that title, how they dismissed it with a smile, and what it taught me about love that only shows up when you're losing. If you've ever been punished for thriving, stay with me. Because by the end you might just see your own reflection in my silence. And if this story sounds too real, hit subscribe. We don't just tell stories here. We tell the ones no one else ever talks about. I never expected applause at home. That just wasn't how our family worked. If you did well, you moved on. If you failed, they asked what went wrong. But the day I won the state debate championship, I thought maybe just this once, things would be different. I remember standing on that stage, the bright lights in my face, heart pounding from the final round. The judges announced my name, not as a finalist, not as runner-up, but as state champion. I remember gripping the edge of the podium so tightly my knuckles turned white. Not because I was scared, but because I didn't know how to react to being seen. People clapped. My coach smiled wide. Even my opponent hugged me. And in that moment I didn't feel invisible. When I called home that night, my voice was shaking with joy. I won, I said, expecting maybe, just maybe, some excitement on the other end. But all I got was a calm, "That's great, sweetheart. We're proud of you." And then the conversation shifted to what my brother had eaten for dinner. He had refused vegetables again. It didn't sting at first. I was used to it. Used to being the reliable one, the quiet achiever, the one who didn't need attention. But I kept telling myself the real moment would come when the trophy arrived. The school said they'd ship it to our home address. A solid, gold-plated monument to the thing I had built with late nights, failed drafts, panic attacks before rounds, and years of getting back up. I imagined opening that box myself, running my fingers along the engraved plate. Maybe even taking a photo and framing it on my wall. A reminder that I had done something that couldn't be ignored. A week later the box came. But I didn't see it. I came home from school to find it already opened. The trophy, my trophy, was sitting on the shelf in my brother's room. I froze. At first I thought maybe he'd opened the package by mistake. But then I noticed the way it had been arranged. Centered, dusted, lit by the lamp beside his desk. Like it belonged there. Like it was his. I walked downstairs trying to keep my voice calm. Why is my trophy in his room? My mother barely looked up from the kitchen sink. Oh, we thought it might motivate him. My father, sitting at the table, nodded. He's been struggling so much lately. It might push him to aim higher. My mouth opened but nothing came out. It wasn't just about the object. It was what it meant. The hours I had poured into preparing for that championship. The tears. The anxiety. The fact that I had finally won something, and not just for the team but for myself. Something no one could say was luck. Something earned. And they gave it away like a tool. A motivational object for the child who once again needed to be encouraged, coddled, rescued. Does he even know what it's for? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. My mom shrugged. He knows you won it. But we explained it's more of a family achievement. A family achievement. As if they had stood beside me during those suffocating rounds. As if they had held me while I sobbed quietly in a bathroom stall between prelims. As if my brother, who had once mocked my voice when I practiced in the living room, somehow deserved to be the one who woke up every morning with my victory staring back at him. I walked back to my room in silence, closed the door, and sat on my bed without moving for what felt like hours. I wish I could say I marched in there and took it back. That I yelled, demanded, cried. But I didn't. Because I had been taught, not through words but through years of examples, that my wins were everyone's and my pain was mine alone. That's how it had always worked. When my brother failed a math test, my parents hired a tutor. When I aced mine, they said, "Great job," and moved on. When he got into a small local college, they threw a dinner. When I got into a top-tier university on partial scholarship, they said, "Be careful not to act like you're better than anyone." And I believed them. For years. I believed that being quiet was noble. That being strong meant not needing praise. That love was measured not by celebration but by responsibility. But that day, staring at a trophy that had been stripped of its meaning, Something cracked. It wasn't anger. Not yet. Just a slow, dull realization that maybe the reason they never celebrated my wins was because they didn't see them as mine. They saw them as tools, as fuel for my brother's fire, as balance in a household tilted toward his emotional fragility. And I, the steady one, the you'll be fine one, was the bridge everyone walked across. That night I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling for hours, hearing their words echo in my head. It's a family achievement. He needed it more. Over and over until it started to sound like a chant, one I'd been hearing my entire life without realizing. He needs it more. He's more sensitive. He's not as strong as you. You understand, right? That last one was always the most dangerous. You understand? Sounds like a compliment, like trust. But it's really just another way of saying, you can handle being hurt, so we'll hurt you first. I started remembering moments I hadn't thought about in years. The time I stayed up until 2 a.m. helping him with his science project, even though I had a test the next day. He got a B. I failed mine. My parents praised me for being such a good sister. The time I let him borrow my laptop, the one I used for every assignment, college app, and debate brief, and he accidentally deleted my entire research folder. My mom said, "It's okay, sweetie. Your sister will figure it out. She always does." The time he ruined my favorite dress by wearing it to a school costume event as a joke, and my dad said I was overreacting when I cried. It's just a dress. Let it go. Every time, the message was the same. His needs matter. Yours can wait. His feelings are fragile. Yours are optional. He messes up, we step in. You succeed, we stay silent. And the worst part? I had accepted it. Not because I agreed, but because I thought it was love. Because when you're a girl who learns early how to hold everything together, you start to believe that's your worth. Not your wins. Not your voice. But your ability to swallow disappointment without complaint. Still, something shifted after that trophy. I couldn't pretend it didn't matter anymore. I stopped eating dinner with them. Started spending more time in the library after school. Not even studying, just sitting in the quiet where no one asked me to sacrifice anything. My mom noticed eventually. "You've been distant," she said one night. "Everything okay?" I wanted to scream, "You gave away my trophy like it was a toothbrush." But I didn't. I just looked at her and said, "Yeah, I'm fine." The words tasted like dust. But I wasn't ready yet. Not to fight. Not to explain. I needed time. I needed space to figure out if I was even allowed to be angry. Because anger for girls like me always comes with guilt. We're trained to shrink it. Dress it up as confusion or hurt feelings. We're not allowed to just be mad. But I was. Quietly. Deeply. Burningly mad. At them. At him. At myself for letting it happen. The next debate practice, my coach pulled me aside. "Everything okay?" she asked. "I'm just tired," I said. She nodded, then reached into her drawer and pulled something out. It was a small plaque. Engraved with my name and state champion first place. Forensic League. "I ordered an extra," she said. "I had a feeling you might not get to keep the real one." Something in me cracked. Again. Not from pain this time. From relief. That someone had seen. That someone had anticipated the betrayal. That someone had quietly prepared a piece of dignity for me to hold. I held the plaque in my hands. It wasn't gold. It wasn't shiny. But it was mine. And for the first time since the day of the championship, I felt like I could breathe. That night, I didn't go straight home. I took the long way, walking past empty streets and glowing windows, carrying that plaque in my backpack like it was the most precious thing I owned. As it was. Not because it represented winning, but because it represented being remembered. I didn't bring up the trophy again. Not because I forgot, but because I knew exactly what would happen if I did. They would tell me I was making it a bigger deal than it was. That I should be happy they cared about his progress. That real strength is about sharing your success, not hoarding it. They always made it sound like I was selfish for wanting something that was already mine. So I stayed silent, on the outside. But something inside me had started shifting. Quietly. Permanently. At school I walked differently. Straighter. Not because I was proud, but because I was done apologizing for taking up space. I stopped bringing up achievements at home. Didn't mention my grades. Didn't tell them when my coach nominated me for a national debate scholarship. When the email came in, I read it alone in my room, smiled to myself, and didn't forward it to the family group chat. It was mine. And this time it would stay that way. But even when you stay quiet, change leaks through. My brother noticed first. He started asking if I was mad at him. And honestly, I wasn't. He hadn't asked for the trophy. He hadn't planned it. He was just used to receiving things meant for someone else. That was the damage. He looked uncomfortable when I didn't respond. "Mom said you're being dramatic," he mumbled one day while passing me in the hallway. I just looked at him. Not angry. Just tired. "Did you think you deserved it?" He didn't answer. And I think for the first time he didn't know what he believed. But the conversation didn't end there. That night my parents called me into the living room. I walked in slowly, already knowing what this would be, a concerned family meeting. The kind where everything I felt would be labeled an attitude problem. "Your mom and I have been talking," my father began, "and we think maybe you've lost some perspective." I didn't speak, just stared at the floor. "You've always been the leader in this house," he continued. "You're strong, level-headed. But lately, you've been distant. Resentful. That's not like you." My mom jumped in. "We just want things to go back to normal. You two were so close growing up." I almost laughed. Close? Or just trapped in a system where one of us was built to support the other? I finally looked up. Normal isn't working for me anymore. They both blinked. Like they hadn't expected me to actually speak. My father leaned forward. "Look, honey, I know the trophy situation hurt you, but it wasn't meant to. You know how much pressure your brother is under. He's trying." "I was under pressure too," I said softly. "I still am." He sighed, leaning back. "But you handle it better. You always have." That was the moment I realized what they really meant every time they called me strong. It wasn't a compliment. It was permission to abandon me. Because strong girls don't need help. Strong girls don't get tired. Strong girls don't mind when their wins are handed to someone else. I stood up. "I don't want to be strong anymore," I said, voice calm but shaking. "Not if it means being invisible." My mom looked like she'd been slapped. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," I said louder now, "that I'm done being useful. I'm done letting my wins be repackaged as someone else's stepping stone. I'm done being the background." And then I walked upstairs. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. I just sat on my bed, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had drawn a line between me and the version of me they wanted to keep using. After that night, something in the air shifted, not just around me but within me. My parents didn't bring it up again. There were no apologies, no grand gestures. Just a stretched silence that filled the house like fog. We coexisted, exchanging basic conversation about groceries and homework, like nothing had been said. But I could feel their discomfort, not because they were hurt but because for the first time I hadn't backed down. It was strange, this new version of me. I wasn't louder. I wasn't ruder. I was just clearer. And clarity, I was learning, made people uncomfortable. At school I began to write more. Not just essays and debate arguments. I started journaling in secret. Every afternoon, tucked away in the back corner of the library, I poured everything I had never been able to say aloud into those pages. Rage. Resentment. Questions. Tiny victories. I wrote about how it felt to win something and have it erased. I wrote about what it means when your parents call you mature, but never once ask if you're okay. I wrote about my brother. Not as a villain, but as a boy who was taught that praise comes easiest when you stumble, and that the real enemy is the one who keeps standing. The writing didn't fix anything, but it gave me space. And space gave me direction. That's when I decided to apply for a National Writing Fellowship. Not through school, not with anyone's help. Just me and my laptop and a quiet belief that maybe I had something worth saying. One of the essays I submitted was titled, "The Strong One in the Family Doesn't Always Survive." I didn't expect anything to come of it. But 3 weeks later I got the acceptance email. Fully funded. Published feature. A small stipend. A 6-week summer writing residency out of state. I remember staring at the screen for a long time, not smiling. Just breathing. It was a moment of confirmation. That my voice had weight. That someone outside these 4 walls saw me, not just what I could carry. I didn't tell my family right away. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I wanted to enjoy it first. Alone. When I finally mentioned it over breakfast, they both blinked. "Writing? Really?" My dad asked, in that careful tone parents use when they're about to say something dismissive. My mom added, "But you're so good at debate. Is this even useful long-term? And there it was again. The refusal to celebrate. The constant urge to edit me into someone who made more sense to them. I just said, it's not supposed to be useful. It's mine. Then I got up and left the room. They didn't follow. Later that week I started packing for the residency. My brother walked in while I was folding clothes. He looked nervous, like he had rehearsed something and wasn't sure how to start. I moved the trophy, he finally said. Took it off my shelf. I paused. Where is it? He hesitated. I put it in the hallway. Thought, maybe we should both see it. I nodded slowly. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Then he added, I didn't ask for it, you know. I know, I said. But you didn't give it back either. He looked down, then quietly said, I didn't know how. I didn't respond. There wasn't anything else to say. He left the room, and I kept packing. Leaving wasn't dramatic. There were no slammed doors, no shouting, no bitter goodbye letters taped to mirrors. Just a suitcase. A quiet morning. And a girl who finally knew the difference between leaving home and reclaiming herself. I boarded the bus with nothing but a duffel bag and my journal. The plaque my coach had given me, the one she made just in case, was tucked between folded clothes. I didn't take the actual trophy. I didn't ask where it ended up. I didn't need to. Because by now I understood something no one had ever said out loud. The object never mattered. The dismissal did. It took me almost the full ride to realize I hadn't cried. Not even once. I wasn't leaving in grief. I wasn't running away. I was walking toward something I had built with my own hands. Words, pain, truth, and all. When I arrived at the residency house, I met other girls like me. Not exactly the same stories, but the same quiet exhaustion. The same haunted resilience. We didn't have to explain why being praised made us uncomfortable, or why we hesitated before accepting compliments. We understood that strength was often just a way to survive emotional neglect with a smile. One night after a workshop, a girl named Kayla asked what my piece was about. I hesitated, then said, it's about a trophy. She raised an eyebrow. A trophy? Yeah, I nodded. But not really. It's about what happens when people only love you for being reliable. For never making them uncomfortable. She didn't say anything for a second. Then she whispered, that, I feel that. That conversation stayed with me for days. Because it was the first time I felt like my story wasn't just mine. That maybe other people had sat in those same kitchens, smiled through the same betrayals, carried the same guilt for wanting to be celebrated. We wrote every day. We shared pieces with each other. We cried sometimes, not just from pain but from recognition. And somewhere along the way, I stopped needing my family to see me. Not out of spite. Out of peace. I didn't write home much. They didn't call often either. My brother sent a text once. Just a photo of the hallway shelf. The trophy was back in its original box, taped shut. I didn't reply. Because it wasn't a gesture. It was a delay. An attempt to undo something that had already shaped too many years of my life. And I was done living inside the apology that never came. I came home a week after the writing residency ended. Not because I missed them. Not because I thought anything had changed. But because sometimes, you need to face the place that broke you, just to prove it no longer holds power over you. The house looked the same. Same front door, same cracked tile near the entryway. Same scent of overcooked rice and lemon cleaning spray. I walked in like a visitor, not a daughter. My mom greeted me with a warm smile that felt slightly too practiced. We missed you, she said. But the pause before her hug gave away the awkwardness neither of us knew how to name. My dad stood in the hallway, hands in his pockets. Heard the program went well. It did, I said. No emotion. No need to over-explain. I walked past them both and into my room. Nothing had been touched. The bed still unmade the way I left it. The old books still piled near the desk. But something inside me had changed so completely that even the familiar felt foreign. I noticed one thing though. The shelf in the hallway where my trophy had once sat, empty now. No box. No fake family award. Just silence. It didn't comfort me. But it didn't hurt either. Later that evening my mom knocked on the door and came in holding a folder. We saved all the mail that came for you, she said, placing it on my desk. A few colleges wrote back. I nodded. Thanks. She lingered. Like she wanted to say something else. And then she did. I read your piece. I looked up. She wasn't defensive. She wasn't angry. She was quiet. I didn't know you felt that way, she said. I shrugged. I didn't know I was allowed to. She didn't argue. She didn't deny. She just sat on the edge of my bed and looked down at her hands. We always thought you were the one who didn't need anything, she said. That you'd be fine no matter what. And that made it okay? I asked. My voice was calm, too calm maybe. No, she whispered. It didn't. But it made it easier to believe. That line hit harder than I expected. Because that's what so many parents do, isn't it? They confuse coping with thriving. They assume silence means stability. And they mistake survival for strength. We didn't cry. There was no cinematic moment of reconciliation. Just two women sitting in a room, one finally admitting what the other had known for years. I didn't forgive her then. But I softened. A little. The next morning I found the trophy. It was in a cardboard box under the stairs, next to holiday decorations and old school projects. Still intact. Still engraved. Still mine. I pulled it out gently and brought it to my room. Not to display it, but to decide what to do with it on my own terms. I ended up wrapping it in a towel and putting it in my suitcase. Not because I needed the object, but because I wanted the choice. Later that night I got a message from Kayla, one of the girls from the residency. She'd been accepted into a similar program in another city, and she wanted to know if I'd be interested in co-writing a piece with her. I didn't hesitate. I said yes. Because while my family had taught me how to survive, that summer had taught me something much more important. How to belong without permission. Classes started again in the fall. And this time I walked into school without that low hum of anxiety that used to follow me through the halls. The fear of not being enough, of needing to win to be noticed. Now I wasn't performing for anyone. I was creating, for me. I joined the school's literary club. Started reading my pieces out loud during open mic events. Not the clean, polished debate arguments I used to perfect, but raw pages. Ugly ones. Honest ones. Stories about girls who gave everything and got nothing in return. And how they kept walking anyway. People listened. And they clapped. But more importantly, they saw me. Not just the high achiever. Not the strong one. Just me. The girl who had been passed over so many times, she almost forgot what it felt like to be centered in her own story. A few weeks in, my English teacher pulled me aside. I read your fellowship essay, she said. It moved me. Thank you, I replied. Then she added something I'll never forget. You write like someone who survived without rescue. I didn't say anything. Just nodded slowly. Guess it was true. I didn't grow up unloved. I wasn't neglected in the textbook sense. I had food, shelter, holidays, and birthday cards. But I had spent my whole life being told I didn't need attention, because I was capable. And that quiet, invisible assumption had slowly crushed something I didn't even know was fragile. My voice. And now that I had it back, I wasn't going to waste it. One weekend I went to visit Kayla in the city. We sat in a coffee shop for hours, laptops open, throwing paragraphs back and forth like tennis volleys. We were writing an article about sibling dynamics. How girls are often taught to set themselves on fire to keep their brothers warm. The piece wasn't subtle. They didn't have to be. At one point she looked up and said, "Do you think your parents have any idea how much they hurt you?" I thought for a long time. I don't know, I said. And I'm starting to realize. I don't need them to. She smiled. That's healing. Or maybe just finally letting go of being understood. She nodded. That's the same thing. We finished the piece, submitted it to a national teen journal, and within 2 weeks we were published. People messaged us. Girls from all over. Some from big cities, some from rural towns. All saying the same thing. This is my story. I thought I was the only one. Thank you for writing what I couldn't say. And I realized, the best trophy I ever earned wasn't made of metal. It was the sentence that started with, "Me too." It happened faster than I expected. After the article Kayla and I co-wrote went live, it was picked up by a larger digital platform focused on youth voices. Then came a podcast interview. A short segment on local radio. A repost by a popular youth mental health page. Within 3 weeks, it had over 200,000 views. And for the first time ever, my name wasn't just a line in a report card. It was visible. Attached to truth. Pain. Clarity. Courage. I was proud. but also nervous. Because I knew what might come next. And I was right. My mom called me late one evening. "I saw your article," she said. Pause. "Why didn't you tell us it was going to be published again?" I stayed quiet. Then she added, "Some of our friends saw it too. They're asking questions." There was not, "I'm proud of you." Not, "I'm sorry you lived through that." Just discomfort. Embarrassment. Reputation. I could hear it in her voice, the subtle demand to justify myself. "You wrote about us," she continued. "But you didn't use names." "No," I said flatly. "Because the story wasn't about blame. It was about me." She exhaled. "I just wish you would have warned us." "Warned them?" I almost laughed. "I wish you would have protected me," I said. "But we don't always get what we wish." I ended the call shortly after that. No shouting. No tears. Just the quiet confirmation that some people don't want to be seen, unless they control how they're seen. A few days later my dad emailed me. Not called. Emailed. It was short. "We're glad you're doing well. Just wanted to say we read your work. Keep up the good writing." That was it. No depth. No ownership. A press release disguised as support. I didn't respond. Because what do you say to people who taught you to carry everything, and now want credit for the strength it took to survive? The turning point came 2 weeks later. I was invited to speak at a local youth summit, a panel on young female leadership and emotional resilience. The kind of event my parents would have dragged me to as a child to network. This time I was on the stage. And yes, they showed up. They sat near the back. I didn't invite them, but I didn't tell them not to come either. I saw my brother there too, looking a little awkward, a little lost. I stood on that stage, mic in hand under bright lights, and told my story. I didn't name names. I didn't throw anyone under the bus. I just said, sometimes, the hardest thing you can do is succeed in a family that only notices struggle. You learn to become low maintenance, easy, invisible. And when you finally ask to be seen, they act like you're being difficult. But you're not. You're healing. When I stepped off the stage, I didn't look at them. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need anything from them anymore. The message came late at night and I almost didn't open it. It was from my brother. Just 3 words. "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long time. We hadn't spoken directly since the summit, where I stood on a stage and said out loud what I'd been carrying for years. I wondered what he wanted. Was it damage control? An apology? A chance to rewrite the story now that other people were paying attention? Still, something in me said yes. Not because I owed him anything, but because for the first time he wasn't pretending nothing had happened. We agreed to meet at a diner halfway between our apartments. I picked a corner booth where we wouldn't be overheard. He showed up 10 minutes late, looking tired. Not disheveled, but not put together either. Like someone unsure of the ground he was standing on. He ordered coffee. I didn't say much. Finally, he leaned forward and said, "I read everything. The articles. The comments. Even the podcast you did." I nodded. "Okay. I didn't know it was that deep," he said. I knew things were kind of unfair sometimes. But I didn't realize how much it actually hurt you." I looked at him carefully. He wasn't being defensive. He wasn't playing victim. But he also wasn't entirely sure how to carry the weight of what he was acknowledging. "You didn't know," I repeated. "Because you never had to." He winced a little, then nodded. "I guess. I just always thought you were okay." "That's the thing," I said, quieter than I expected. "Everyone did. Everyone thought I was okay because I was quiet. Because I didn't throw tantrums. Because I didn't cry loud enough." He stirred his coffee, avoiding eye contact. "You remember when they gave you my trophy?" I asked. His eyes flicked up. "Yeah. They told me it was for motivation. That you needed it more. Do you even remember what you said that day?" He hesitated. "Honestly, I don't." "You didn't say anything," I said. "You just took it." He looked ashamed. "I was 13. I didn't know what to do." "I was 15, I said. And I knew exactly what had just been taken from me." We sat in silence. The kind of silence that doesn't demand to be filled. Just acknowledged. He finally said, "I thought you didn't care. You didn't cry or yell or anything." "I was numb," I said. "And even if I did cry, what would have changed? They still would have said I was being dramatic. Or ungrateful. He nodded slowly. I wish I had said something. Me too, I said. But I don't blame you for what they did. I blame you for never looking at me and asking, "Are you okay?" Not once. He swallowed hard. You're right. Something about that cracked the wall between us. Not completely, but just enough for some air to pass through. I know it's not enough, he said. But I'm sorry. I let the words sit there. I didn't rush to forgive him. I didn't brush it off. I just let them land. Because for the first time I wanted the silence between us to mean something. We talked a while longer, not about the trophy, not even about our parents. Just about who we were now. Where we were going. What we wanted. And as we talked I realized something strange. I didn't hate him. I didn't even resent him the way I thought I did. What I hated was the role I was forced to play, and the silence he let fill the space between us. But now that we were breaking that silence, the anger was dissolving into something else. Something like understanding. Before we left he said, "Do you think Mom and Dad will ever get it?" I looked at him then shook my head. I don't think they're ready to. And I'm not waiting anymore. He nodded. Fair. We walked out into the night and went separate ways. No dramatic goodbye. No promises to call more. Just peace. And that was more than I thought I'd ever get from him. Later that week I was invited to contribute a piece to a national teen anthology. Stories from young women about the moments that defined them. I didn't hesitate. I knew exactly what I'd write. But this time I didn't write it like a diary. I wrote it like evidence. Like proof. Like history. I described the championship win. The car ride home. The smile on my dad's face when he said, "You don't need a trophy to know you're good." I wrote about the trophy being handed to my brother like a hand-me-down jacket. About the sting of watching him display it on his shelf while I sat in my room, pretending I didn't care. I wrote about the silence at dinner. About the way my mom said, "You're the strong one, he needs this more." And then I wrote about the aftermath, not the bitterness but the awakening. The slow, painful realization that being strong had become a prison I didn't know how to leave. When I submitted the piece I felt a strange calm. And when they told me it would be published, featured even, I didn't tell anyone. Not my parents. Not my old debate coach. Not even my brother. Because this time it wasn't about being seen. It was about seeing myself. The book launch was in New York. I had never flown alone before. Never stayed in a hotel with tall windows and soft lights and little chocolates wrapped in gold foil by the bed. Never been in a room where editors, journalists, and youth advocates asked me questions and actually waited for the answers. But there I was, 18, nervous, and holding a copy of the anthology with my name printed in sharp black letters beneath the title of my story. The trophy they gave my brother. When I stepped into the event hall, it hit me. This was the first space I'd ever entered where no one knew my family. No one saw me as the older sibling or the reliable daughter. I was just the writer. The voice. A woman in her 30s walked up to me with a press badge and said, "You don't know what your piece did for me." I grew up the same way. Always the one who had to shrink so others could be seen. I smiled. "Thank you." He kept going. "But you didn't just write pain. You wrote resistance. You made it clear that quiet people aren't empty, they're just watching." That line sat with me for days. Because yes, I had watched. I had watched my parents comfort my brother when he failed and ignore me when I succeeded. I had watched them lower the bar for him and raise it so high for me that even perfection wasn't enough. I had watched myself become a ghost, not by accident but by design. Now I was unhosting. Page by page. Word by word. After the reading, a few of us authors were invited on stage for a Q&A. The moderator looked at me. "What would you say to the girl who's still waiting to be seen by her family?" I paused. Took a breath. Felt my chest tighten. "I'd tell her this," I said. "You don't have to wait for someone else to validate your voice. If they couldn't see you, that was their blindness, not your invisibility. Start where you are. Write it down. Paint it. Scream it. But don't stay silent just because someone else refused to listen." The room went quiet. Then applause. Not polite. Not forced. Later that night, back in the hotel, I got a text from my mom. Just 5 words. "Your dad saw the interview." I stared at it. No emoji. No follow-up. No warmth. And yet I knew what she meant. He was upset. Probably pacing the living room. probably muttering to himself about how I had twisted the truth. Maybe even yelling about how I made the family look bad. But for once I didn't care. Because this wasn't his story to fix. It was mine to tell. 2 days later I got a call from a private number. I usually don't answer those, but something told me to pick up. Hello. There was a pause. Then, it's your coach. My old debate coach. The one who watched me carry the team for 2 years straight. The one who never once pulled me aside to ask how I was holding up when I got benched for the final showcase because we need your brother to feel included. I read your piece, she said. I waited. I didn't know you felt that way. I almost laughed. Really? She cleared her throat. Okay, maybe I did. But I didn't realize how deep it went. I said nothing. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. Not for the decisions she made. Not for being complicit in silencing me. Sorry. I wasn't sure what to do with that. So I said, I hope you're paying more attention to the quiet kids now. She paused. I am. That was enough. Not closure. But an open window. When I got back home from New York, my parents were waiting at the house. Not to celebrate. Not to congratulate. But to assess. They wanted to know how it went. Who I met. What the next steps were. It felt more like a business meeting than a reunion. At one point my dad said, I just hope you're not exaggerating things to get attention. That's when I stood up. Let me be clear, I said. I'm not exaggerating anything. I'm telling the truth that everyone else ignored. He looked taken aback. You make it sound like we were villains. You weren't villains, I said. You were just careless with the one thing I needed most. Acknowledgement. My mom reached out gently. We didn't know. You chose not to know, I corrected. And then I picked up my bag and left. Clear. Not slamming doors this time. Just done trying to prove my pain was valid. 2 months later, the anthology hit national charts. I got invited to do a TEDx youth talk. A small publisher reached out about a solo memoir project. And my inbox, filled with messages from girls and boys who said things like, I never realized I've been holding my breath for years. You gave me the words I didn't know I needed. I always felt like I didn't deserve to be angry. Now I know I was just silenced. It was strange. For the first time in my life, people were listening, really listening, and yet I didn't feel the need to shout anymore. The louder the world got, the quieter I became inside. Not in the silence kind of way, but in the anchored kind of way. So I was invited to schools, panels, women's circles, even a campus fellowship program focused on narratives from underrepresented voices. But I wasn't just telling my story anymore. I was helping others tell theirs. That's when I realized something important. Healing isn't just about being heard. It's about helping others hear themselves. One afternoon, I hosted a writing workshop for girls aged 13 to 17. It was in a small, carpeted room at a community center. Nothing fancy. Folding chairs, dry markers, mismatched notebooks. But their eyes? Waiting. Hungry for permission. I asked them to write about the moment you realized you were being treated like you were fine, when you weren't. They wrote for 20 minutes straight. And when we shared aloud, something electric passed through the room. One girl said, I got good grades and stopped asking for help, and my mom told me she was proud she didn't need to worry about me. Another said, my brother failed math and they hired a tutor. I struggled in silence and no one noticed. Another, almost whispering, said, I'm the strong one in my family, and sometimes I wish I wasn't. I didn't speak. I just listened. Because that's what I would have wanted at their age, not solutions. Just someone to say, I see you. That night walking home I thought about how far I'd come. Not geographically. Not professionally. Emotionally. There was a time when I would have twisted myself into knots to justify why I was hurting. Now I simply let the story breathe. There was a time I thought visibility would solve everything. But visibility without authenticity is just noise. Now I knew the difference. One morning I opened an envelope in the mail. It was an invitation, not a panel, not a reading. It was from my old high school. They wanted me to return as a guest speaker for the senior awards ceremony. The same one where they once handed my brother the most improved student trophy, while I got a stiff handshake and a good job as always. I held the letter in my hand for a long time. Part of me wanted to toss it. Another part whispered, go. Not for them. For you. So I went. The auditorium looked smaller than I remembered. The lighting was dimmer. The energy, different. But I didn't feel like an outsider anymore. I felt like a mirror. A girl from this building, from those halls, who had learned to write herself out of invisibility, and now had the mic. I stood at the podium and took a breath. This school taught me a lot, I began. Not just academically. Emotionally. There were murmurs. Recognition. I learned how to show up every day with a smile even when I was carrying things no one could see. I learned how to win awards and hide the exhaustion. I learned how to watch others get celebrated for climbing mountains I had already passed. Some parents shifted uncomfortably. Some students sat still. I used to think that being the strong one was something to be proud of, I continued. And it is. But only if you choose it, not if it's forced on you. Then I looked straight at the students. To anyone out there who's been told you don't need praise because you're already doing well, I see you. To the quiet ones who got skipped because they didn't complain, I hear you. To the ones who were told to wait for validation that never came, you don't have to wait anymore. Silence. Then applause. Then standing applause. After the ceremony, a teacher I hadn't seen in years came up to me. She looked older, but her voice was the same. I should have spoken up when I saw what happened with the trophy, she said. I'm sorry. I nodded. Thank you. She hesitated. Does it help hearing that now? I thought for a moment. It doesn't change what happened. But it reminds me I wasn't imagining it. She smiled. You weren't. That meant more than I expected. When I got home that night, I found a small package on my porch. No return address. Just a card inside. You deserve this more than I ever did. I'm sorry it took me so long to realize that. I opened the box. Inside was the trophy. The actual state championship trophy. The one that had sat on my brother's shelf for years, gathering dust and pretending to belong to someone it didn't. Now it was back in my hands. But the strangest thing happened. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel emotional. I just smiled. Because I didn't need it anymore. I had already won. A month after the trophy arrived, I moved into my first apartment. It wasn't glamorous. Just a small studio on the 3rd floor with creaky floors, white walls, and a view of an alley. But it was mine. Every inch of that space was filled with quiet choices. Books I loved. A chair I found at a thrift store. A lamp that glowed gold at night. And in one corner, on a simple wooden shelf, sat the trophy. Not as a monument to pain, but as a reminder. I survived erasure and turned it into language. The more I wrote, the less I felt the urge to explain myself. Not because I had nothing left to say, but because the people who needed my explanations were no longer my audience. Instead, I wrote for the girls who hadn't yet found their voices. The ones who hadn't stood on a stage. The ones who were still shrinking to make others feel tall. One of my new essays was titled, "The Strong One is Tired." It went viral overnight. In it, I talked about the emotional labor of being the child parents don't worry about. How being high-functioning is often mistaken for being okay. How some girls are praised not because they're fine, but because they've mastered the art of suffering silently. I didn't use names. I didn't need to. Because readers saw themselves in every line. Then came the podcast request. I was hesitant at first. Radio silence had become a form of peace. But one platform reached out with an idea that felt different. They wanted to do a series called Unnoticed Daughters, where girls like me shared the hidden chapters behind their achievements. I agreed. During the recording, the host asked, "Do you think your story would have been different if anyone, had stopped and said, 'I see what you're carrying'?" I took a long pause. Then said, "It wouldn't have changed the events. But it would have changed how I healed." He nodded. "Did anyone ever say that to you?" I thought. "Not back then," I replied. "But now. Strangers do. And somehow that feels more honest." A few days later, I was invited back to my hometown for a local youth summit. Not to speak about pain, but about rebuilding identity after erasure. I stood backstage watching teenage girls gather with notebooks and quiet nervous energy, the same kind I used to carry like a weight. Before walking out, I closed my eyes and whispered something under my breath. "You are no longer the version of yourself they forgot." And then I stepped out. My talk was called, "We Don't Have to Be the Quiet Ones Forever." I told them the truth. Not the curated Instagram truth, but the raw, uneaten truth. That being silenced by love is still being silenced. That invisibility wrapped in praise is still harm. That strength is beautiful, but it should be chosen, not assigned like a family chore. I ended the talk with a line I'd scribbled weeks earlier in a journal. When they hand your story to someone else, take it back. And rewrite it in your own handwriting. They clapped. Some stood. A few cried. And in that moment I realized something I hadn't fully accepted until then. I wasn't broken. I was rewritten. By me. That night I received a long message from my aunt, my dad's sister. She had read all my work, she said. Heard the podcast. Watched the TEDx talk. And then she wrote, I remember the night of the trophy. I remember how quiet you were. I wish I had said something. I'm saying it now. So you always did. I just didn't know how to show it. I cried reading that. Because she didn't try to defend anyone. She didn't say, they meant well. She didn't ask for understanding. She just saw me. And sometimes that's all we want. It happened unexpectedly. I hadn't planned to see her. Not soon. Maybe not ever. But one Sunday afternoon, as I was coming out of a bookstore with my bag full of paperbacks and annotated memoirs, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. It's me. I don't want to argue. I just want to talk. If you're open to it. I didn't need to ask who it was. Only one person in my life ever opened a conversation with an apology disguised as a disclaimer. My mother. We met at a quiet cafe not far from my apartment. Neutral ground. No memories. No family history tucked into the corners of the walls. She walked in slowly, almost like she was afraid her presence alone might cause me to turn away. But I didn't. I nodded toward the seat across from me and she took it without a word. We ordered coffee. Then silence. Long, sticky, loud. She was the one to break it. I read everything. The essays. The podcast. That line you said at the school. Acknowledgement was the one thing I needed most. It hit me harder than you think. I stayed quiet. Not because I wanted to punish her. But because for once I needed her to fill the silence she helped create. She tried again. I know I wasn't the mother you needed. And I don't expect you to forgive me just because I say that now. But I need you to know something. I looked up. Her eyes were glassy. But she wasn't crying. She was holding it together the same way I had learned to, from her. When you were little, you never asked for anything. You never complained. You just handled things. But I thought that was a blessing. I thought I got lucky, a child who didn't need coddling. I couldn't hold it anymore. It wasn't luck, Mom. It was survival. I didn't speak up because every time I tried, you made me feel like I was burdening you. Like my needs were optional. She looked down. I didn't mean to do that. But you did. Another pause. A deeper one. When Dad gave him that trophy, I continued, you didn't even flinch. You smiled. Do you know what that did to me? Her voice was barely above a whisper. I thought it would motivate him. I thought, if we made him feel special, maybe he'd stop spiraling. I didn't realize what it was costing you. You didn't ask. She nodded. You're right. And that moment, that admission, felt heavier than anything she could have said. Because for once she didn't argue. She didn't sugarcoat. She didn't tell me to understand. She just listened. Every time he failed, I said, you threw a safety net under him. But when I succeeded, you gave me more pressure. More silence. You told people I was mature. But you never once asked how much of that was me, and how much of it was because no one gave me a choice. She blinked hard. I thought I was doing what mothers do. Keep the family balanced. Put fires out before they spread. But you let me burn quietly. And then she finally cried. Not dramatic loud sobs. But the kind of crying that happens when truth punches straight through decades of silence. We sat there a long time. No performative forgiveness. No dramatic hugging. Just an open table between us. Finally filled with the things that were left unsaid for years. Before she left, she reached into her bag. She handed me something. It was a photograph. Me at 15 standing beside my debate coach holding a certificate. My hair tied back. My smile forced. My eyes, tired. I found it in an old drawer, she said. I never framed it. I should have. I'm sorry. I took the photo. And for the first time I saw myself not through the lens of pain. But as a girl who deserved to be noticed even then. Later that night I placed the photograph beside the trophy. Side by side. Past and present. Silenced and seen. And I whispered to the girl in the photo, the one with the tired eyes and brave smile. They didn't see you. But I do. And from now on, you don't have to earn love to receive it. Freedom didn't arrive with fanfare. It didn't knock on my door one morning with flowers or fireworks or a message that said, "Congratulations, you've healed." It showed up in smaller ways. Like the first time I bought a birthday card and didn't feel obligated to send it to someone who forgot mine. Like saying no to a phone call and not spending the rest of the day feeling guilty. Like laughing out loud, really loud, in a room full of people who knew nothing about my history and not caring whether they ever did. Freedom was quiet. But it stayed. I started doing more readings at small bookstores and university events. Not the high-pressure national stage kind. These were intimate. People sat on beanbags and folding chairs, sometimes with hot tea in their hands, listening like they needed each word to breathe. At one of those readings, a girl no older than 16 came up to me after and said, "You made me feel like not everything that happened to me was my fault." And just like that, I knew I didn't need millions of views or standing ovations. Just that one sentence. From that one girl. That was enough. Meanwhile, life began to build itself around me, slowly without panic. I adopted a black cat with one eye and a permanently bent tail. I named her Maybe. Because healing is never certain. And I liked the honesty in that. Maybe followed me everywhere in the apartment. She'd curl up next to me when I edited my manuscripts and paw at my laptop when she wanted attention, which was often. Felt grounding. To care for something without needing it to understand my past. One afternoon, I visited a thrift market and found a broken gold picture frame. The glass was cracked. The back had water damage. But the frame? Still intact. Still beautiful. I bought it for $2. When I got home, I placed the old photo of me, the one from the debate team, inside it. Cracks and all. Because some things don't need to be fixed. They just need to be held. Honestly, imperfectly. That photo now sits on my desk, next to the framed certificate from the Youth Storytelling Fellowship and a note I once scribbled on a napkin. You don't need permission to matter. Eventually, I published a book. Not a memoir exactly. More like a series of connected essays. Each one pulling apart a moment that used to feel too tangled to touch. One chapter was called, "Don't Give My Trophy to Anyone Else." Another was titled, "You Raised Me to Be the One Who Didn't Ask." And the closing piece? When you are finally enough, without anyone saying so. It didn't hit bestseller lists. But it hit inboxes. Letters poured in. Handwritten ones. Scanned pages. Long emails typed at 3 a.m. by people who said they had never told anyone what they'd been through. They weren't just stories. They were echoes. Proof that I wasn't alone. Proof that we're never really as invisible as we think. Someone always sees, eventually. One day as I sat by the window with Maybe asleep in my lap, I received an email from my brother. It was short. "I read your book. It hurt. But it also helped. I'm sorry. For all of it. I see it now. I really do." I didn't reply right away. Not out of anger, I wasn't angry. I just wanted to sit with the weight of what it meant. He finally saw me. Not the sister who always had it together. Not the girl he was told to model after. Just me. I wrote back 2 days later. "Thank you. It wasn't about blame. It was about truth. And I'm glad you found it." That was all. We didn't talk much after that, but the silence between us? It wasn't tension anymore. It was peace. Later that summer, I got asked to teach a short course at a local writing retreat. Not on grammar. Not on publishing. The class was called Voice, Finding Yours After It Was Taken. It filled up within 2 hours. The first session, I walked into a room full of people of all ages. Some had notebooks. Some didn't. All of them carried a look I knew too well. The look of someone still waiting to feel like they're allowed to take up space. I started by writing a sentence on the board. You don't need their silence to speak your story into existence. And then I turned around and said, "Welcome. You're not too late. You never were." That night, back in my apartment, I opened a new journal and wrote, "This is not a comeback. Because I never left. I was always here. Just buried beneath the noise of other people's expectations." And I underlined one word. Always. Because for the first time in my life I believed it. Fall arrived with little fanfare. Leaves changed color slowly outside my window, turning golden, then amber, then brown, like they weren't in a rush to let go. I took long walks in the morning with a thermos of cinnamon tea in one hand and maybe trailing behind me like a tiny shadow. Life had lost its urgency and I loved it that way. There was no race anymore. No one I needed to convince. No room I needed to prove myself in. No version of me left to perform. Just me. Fully. Quietly. Finally whole. My therapist once asked, "What does healing look like for you?" Not conceptually, physically. Tangibly. In your body and your days. I didn't have an answer then. Now I do. It looks like sleep. Deep, uninterrupted sleep. It looks like reading books I'm not expected to quote on stage. Looks like skipping a call, choosing a boundary, cooking a meal just for me. Looks like celebrating my own wins, even if no one else claps. Looks like this life. This room. These quiet mornings. One weekend, I hosted a small gathering for a few students from my writing class. We didn't write. We didn't teach. We just existed. Someone brought cookies. Another girl played guitar. One boy recited a poem he'd written on the back of a grocery list. I looked around the room and felt something I hadn't felt as a teenager, as a daughter, as a girl standing beside a boy holding her trophy. I felt seen. Without needing to be spectacular. That night, after everyone left, I picked up the trophy from the shelf. Not to stare at it in pain. Not to reminisce. Just to hold it. It had become something entirely new. Not a reminder of what was taken, but a symbol of what I reclaimed. The metal was cold in my hands, but my heart wasn't. And I smiled. Not because I needed it, but because I didn't. I started a new writing project. Not a book. Not an essay. A letter. To her. To the girl I used to be. Do you? I know you thought they'd notice eventually. That if you just stayed good, stayed quiet, stayed useful, they'd finally hand you what you earned. They didn't. And that wasn't your fault. Asterisk, you didn't lose your worth the moment someone else got your credit. You didn't become invisible because you weren't loud enough. You were simply surrounded by people who didn't know how to love someone without needing to rescue them. Asterisk. But you never needed rescuing. You needed recognition. Asterisk, and now you have it. Not from them. From you. Asterisk. I see you now. And I'll never forget again. Love. Me. I printed the letter, folded it neatly and placed it in the back of my journal. Not to reread, but to remember that it exists. That she exists. And that she was always worthy. I still visit my parents. Not often. And not to reopen wounds. Just enough to make peace with what remains and protect what I've built. We don't talk about the trophy. Or the debate. Or that birthday. We don't need to. Because healing didn't mean dragging everyone back into the past. It meant not needing them to follow me into the future. Years from now, maybe someone will ask me what it felt like to win something and watch it be given away. I'll say, it taught me that you can lose a moment and still reclaim the meaning. And if they ask what I did with the trophy, I'll smile and say, asterisk, I stopped fighting for it. I started writing around it. Because sometimes survival isn't about screaming louder. It's about whispering. I'm still here. And that's enough.